23 Years of .NET with Josh Arzt.
The Azure and DevOps podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using the latest in .NET, Azure, AI, and DevOps. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. The show is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a full-service software architecture and engineering firm. Find them at www.clearmeasure.com. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your host for helping you and your teams move fast and deliver quality and to run your software with confidence in Azure, all while using everything that the .NET ecosystem has to offer. Quick announcement, I am hiring a software engineer. Years of experience really don't matter. Competence and capabilities are what matter. And so I'm looking for somebody that eats, sleeps, and breathes .NET and is really good. If you're interested, send me an email, or you can go to clearmeasure.com, go to our careers page. My guest today on the show is Josh Arzt. He is a senior software architect with 25 years and running experience modernizing systems, solving complex problems, and delivering scalable cloud solutions. He's an expert in software engineering, DevSecOps, serverless architectures, cloud migrations. He's a certified professional with a strong publication record in both IT and applied mathematics. And his professional career began back in the early 2000s, where he discovered .NET and all it had to offer, in its early days, was a big breakthrough. And using that framework paired with his maturation and software architecture, that helped shape how he approaches challenges with curiosity, precision, and a focus on making technology practical and reliable. And along the way, he's led teams, modernized systems, written his own software and performance metrics, and helped organizations adapt to change. But what he values most is working with people, mentoring engineers, collaborating across disciplines, and finding ways to connect technical work to real human impact. And he brings both experience and perspective, the ability to see the big picture while never losing sight of the craft that drew him to this field in the first place. I'm excited to have him on the show. Josh, how are you, sir?
I am good. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm excited to have you on. And before we even dive in, I just want to make sure all our listeners know you are up for election for the .NET Foundation board. And so why don't we lead off with that for the listeners? Maybe they've never even looked at or never voted. What's the .NET Foundation and when is the election?
So .NET Foundation, I think the best way to think about it, if you haven't heard of them, is, and I'm a member of it now, so I'm not talking about it as a complete outsider, but definitely think of it as your support for the open source community. We've had a lot of projects there over the years. We just had one that graduated recently, if I'm not mistaken. But essentially think of it as a place to get support and, I would say, visibility for your open source projects. They really do help with enablement. I say we, it's sort of all the same. It's such a large group.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily the same thing. It's not Microsoft. I know some folks may look at that and say, oh, this is a Microsoft group. It's corporate. It's not. It's its own independent entity. And we work with Microsoft, and we do try to help even, the small guys like myself, work to get our projects to be better seen and maybe out there to the broader community, especially when you have an innovation that may not be overly seen. Sorry, excuse me. My phone going nuts behind me. So I don't know if that articulated as well, and I hope nobody from the community is cringing, but I really just look at it as sort of a power up to the open source community.
Yeah. And I ran a user group or multiple user groups for many years, and just one of the just simple benefits is being able to use the corporate or the organization Meetup account and have the full meetup.com website platform just for user group websites, paid for by the .NET Foundation, instead of having to fundraise at the user group level for even something as, what is it, $100 a year or something?
Yeah.
So
I personally feel like foundations like this are so important because it's just so hard to be seen out there. There's just so much. And it doesn't even seem to matter what space you're in. It's just because you just feel like a really tiny fish in a big pond. So really any advantage is good. And nowadays, especially with just everything being flooded with content, it just feels like it's just hard to be seen with all your hard work. You spend a couple of years working on a project and then you really want to get it out there and you just can't figure out the right path to take. I've run across that myself. I mean, I actually have not had a success story in that sense, but I made the best learnings of it. But when I was dealing with this, 15 years ago or so, it was very, very difficult to
Yeah.
get something up and going, especially in such a competitive market when you're dealing with open source versus paid products that have quite the reputation. And, you ask people and they use it almost synonymously with the offering with a product name like Kleenex or Band-Aid. It's sort of the same thing sometimes, like
Right.
you're talking about performance, not to go off tangent, but it's like you say performance and Windows people do like Process Explorer. It's like there are other products, but that's like the first thing people think about. And I'm sure Mark Russinovich loves that to death, but still, it's like, how do you get seen in such a, in such just a vast community of products?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for the listeners who, just kind of getting to know you for the first time, if we could kind of go back, are there some turning points in your career where that kind of led you down the path of software development and coding, and then have kind of kept you engaged, instead of changing careers or moving into management?
Well, I didn't start as a developer. I went to college for computer science because so I've been a professional for you could say the 25 years, but I've actually been doing this in the IT space since I was a kid. Like I was like
Mm,
10 or 11 building computers, not to try to sound
nice.
exceptional, but I was that kid in the basement gutting my dad's 8088 and really irritating him and just messing with it and getting books from the library, being the total, just the worst dorky archetype kid you could think of, just wrecking dad's computer. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and I wanted to be a system builder, and that was really my big thing. I mentioned it. It's like, yeah, I'm going to go to college to do this. This is before any of the IT degrees. So it was
Yeah.
all go into computer science. And I'm like, well, I don't know if that's what I want to do. Well, it's like computer science or nothing. So I
Hmm.
went and did that, and it kind of fell on my face. I mean, I've been always really, really good at mathematics, but I don't feel that I understood it. I didn't have that aha moment, and I was really off put by that. I figured, I'll just, I'll work at help desk. I'll build machines. You know, I'll do app support, and I didn't really think about it much. I couldn't really. So at the time, it was learning C++ plus plus from nothing, and I'm sitting there trying to figure. I'm like, what is inheritance? And then they're trying to shove
Mm,
solid on us, and I didn't understand any of that because I was like, I was 18. I had no clue. I was a math dork and a PC guy. So, um, where does this all go? So, I got the math degree. I got out of college and I worked for my first firm, and it was PC building. And this is just before HP and Dell kind of made all those little houses obsolete. So this is right after the whole dot bomb era, as we call it. So the early
mhm.
2000s, working in shops, building white boxes, as we called them, having some fun doing it. And then, of course, 6 months into that project, a boss who said, I really need this thing, and I don't think I can find the product. And they're like, you look like you'd be into this stuff. You got to write it. I need you to write this for me. And I'm ending up doing that as a side project and kind of pushing myself to figure it out. And this is right before .NET really broke. Like this is still,
Mhm.
we were in the Visual Basic 6 phase, and PHP was kind of on equal footing, and
Yeah.
we were kind of at that epoch. And then I had my aha moment. I was like, oh, this is great. I'll keep doing this as a side tool. And then as I was, moving forward in my career, seeing that there was really no light at the end of the tunnel for white box building unless you went and worked for these larger firms, I had to kind of pivot. I'm like, well, okay, given that I came from a culture of when you do when you are, like if you're a Java developer, this is what you will be until you retire, done. And that's how they kind of like would push it at you, is you'd be that one
Yeah.
trick pony. And I kept trying to diversify my skills just because of interest. And then it ended up becoming a pivot method. So if I had stayed on that path, I probably would have had to make a career switch. So, did I get to software immediately? No. I ended up in the IT space, ended up in the data center space, and then I kept realizing that the more fun problem solving at the end of the day was probably in development. Like I got to that point where I was building really, you know, complex systems for this hosted, company I was working for, and then I was also working on this intranet system, and then I realized, there's kind of a line here as to how far you can go with system building. So I decided to switch over to software engineering, which was probably around 2008. Um, and I refined my skills at that point. I mean, I was kind of doing them both together, but you can only work 80 hours a week for so long in your career. And my wife kept telling
Right.
me to stop doing that. So
Right.
I guess it came more from finally going from technology excitement to just really looking for the best way to solve problems. And software just appealed to me. And I just kept wanting to write code. And I'd already been in .NET for a couple of years after that, and mostly Visual Basic, of course, because C# took a long time to find its feet, I feel. And then when
Mm-hmm.
it did, it hit the ground hard, and then it was awesome. But before it was awesome, a lot of shops were still doing VB.NET.
Yeah.
So, I already was pretty well entrenched in it, but I finally found that place where I was like, I think it's more exciting to be in the development side of it, to actually do these bigger problem solving exercises. It's a long answer to the question, but I had such a weird, I guess societally, it was such a weird time to come out of school because I graduated in '01 or '02, and then it was like
Yeah.
when you got out there, the market dramatically shifted because it was,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, it was after dot bomb, and then we kind of just then system building kind of started to fade and became more corporate. And then, we kind of reached that architectural epoch. We were into 3-tier architecture. We were dealing with where Windows was going. Linux was kind of having a revolution of sorts, in my opinion. So kind of a different time. Like now I feel like the world is totally different in
Yeah.
terms of where we were.
Well, the big shifts, and yeah, I started in the '90s as well, in the era where computers, very few computers were networked, much less
Yeah.
the public internet, high speed call, always connected. Whereas now, well, even just by 2005, it was just expected that, like, of course it's going to be networked. Of course, all these computers are going to be linked together. That's very different software if the computers
Yeah.
are connected versus when they're not connected.
And that happened, actually, it was 1998 is when everybody started getting cable modems. And that was my sophomore year of college. I'll never forget it because my freshman year, to make money, I was selling modem services. Like I was selling
Nice.
dial up because my college didn't have anything. And then all of a sudden, in the summer before my sophomore year, I'm on part of the IT team for the school, walking, putting all these, 3C905 BTX cards in people's computers, which is, was it Broadcom? And we were it was such a good card. And we were going and putting these 10100 cards in everybody's computer. They'd give you the
Mm,
$100 and you'd go and you'd plug it into their machine and get them on the campus-wide Ethernet.
yeah.
And it was people just couldn't understand it. They're like, "Wait, I'm always on the internet. I don't have to dial. I don't understand it." You'd have to explain it to them, and like nobody even knew what Ethernet meant.
Right.
Or you deal with like people's houses where I'd be, trying to hook it up for people, and they're like, "Well, why won't the cable modem connect?" And they have like old school RG6 cable. I'm like, yeah,
Oh, yeah.
or no, I'm sorry, they have old school RG59, and we'd have to kick them up to RG6, so they couldn't even transfer,
Mm,
the bandwidth. So we'd have to rewire their houses. So it was a really weird time, and now it's like it's just life for us. But I mean, I remember, the tones and trying to compete to, you know, just to get online, just to pull down a patch or get an update to a game or something. So
yeah, take forever. You had mentioned, creating these custom white box computers in the '90s, and just for context, because we got so many younger engineers who probably saying, "Oh yeah, there they go, back in my day." But
yeah,
a computer for probably $1,500 was a common price for a white box, maybe 2,000 if you had some extra stuff in there. So
yep.
$1,500 computer in 1995, inflation calculator, that would be $3,188 today. So kind of equivalent of what's spent on a computer. Whereas if we're getting a commodity computer today, like a cheap $700 computer today, that would be like $330 in 1995.
Well, I
So
mean, you guys haven't heard of RAM trees, like with your getting putting four 30-pin SIMs in a 72 slot, or we used to get like those big fat catalogs, like those big just computer catalogs, and you'd buy like what, like 4 megs of RAM for like $200. It was like,
yeah,
and back then you were just like, I'm on top of the world. I can play the latest Star Wars game because I have 8 megs of RAM. And you deal with, or the fact that we used to have turbo buttons. Like people
yeah.
don't even remember
Oh,
that. I
the
mean,
turbo
you
button.
do.
Well, let's talk about .NET.
Sure.
We're gonna lose our audience here.
I know. Sorry, my bad.
So .NET came out in '02, and it's come a long way. One thing that is interesting of your focus is communicating about misconceptions of maybe
Yeah.
somebody it was exposed to .NET a while ago and they had a certain experience and then .NET 10, which is going to come out later this fall, is a totally different thing than it was pre .NET 5. So what are those high points for those people who might not be attuned to it? What's the rundown that you seem to encounter often of misconceptions?
Well, especially so, I mean, .NET Core really did try to bridge that whole gap, right? Like it was really trying to bring us outside of this Windows-centric ecosystem, which I think was the right move, especially because of the competition. I won't pick on Microsoft for that, be like, oh, they only did it because of competition. I think they read the writing on the wall and they realized that they needed to be more expansive. And, when you look at it from, I mean, a lot of my time was, of course, in .NET Framework, which you guys know is alive and well and probably will be till 2034 or whatever it is because it ages with the OS.
Mm-hmm.
When it went to Core, I think some of the things you saw, so people didn't like Core when it first came out. Agree. I think Core really found its footing around 3.1.1. It was like right around that time when it really got performance optimized and it got better. There was a lot more library support. And then Microsoft realized, hey, as we, and I don't mean to be to speak on their behalf, but just what I've observed from having worked with it for as much as I did. When they got to 5, which I know folks want the LTS, so 6, but from 5 to 6, I feel like they really got their feet under them as to saying, okay, if you're in .NET 4 or earlier, this is really where you're going to find your path forward. This is really where we provide you the alternative, libraries that will help you replace the ones that you were using in the Windows ecosystem. So you could do .NET 6.0 - Windows in the case where you're building like a WPF app or Windows Forms or something extremely indigenous. But if not, you could go more the generic route and you could absolutely use it on Linux and it worked fine. Could people say, well, why do that in Linux? You've got all these other languages. Fair enough. I think I don't use Python on Windows, but I use Python in Linux, and people made the argument, why don't you stay in your lane? I think it comes down to not necessarily from a sales point of view, but just when I build an app and I want to use it a certain way, I don't want to write it 3 times. Like that's the whole entire reason we have, just responsive CSS, right? Like who wanted to write? I want to write an Android and an iPhone version of this and then that. It's like Xamarin tried to solve that problem, and I think they did pretty well. And you had other product offerings that did it. You'd rather write it once and just have it adjust for the environment that it's sitting. .NET tried to do the same thing. I know it's not an apples to apples comparison, never mind ARM and all those other pieces, in an x86 ecosystem. I think it's comparable in its own ways, especially like when you're doing things in a performance space. I don't really see a difference at the end of the day when it comes to execution. If I'm not dealing with UI, I could take what I wrote and I can build it for, and put it on an Amazon Linux box and I can run it just fine. And then I don't have all the extra Windows overhead and I don't have to deal with those things if that's not something that I can, stomach for the specific purposes of my app, And maybe I'm not answering there's so much to that answer, but I feel like 5 and 6 is right where Microsoft kind of hit their stride, found acceptable replacements for the 4.x world. And I'm a complete, example of that. I mean, I have an app I wrote a number of years ago called Astronomy, which I'm not trying to sell, but I'm just talking about it, which to me was my supercharged Windows task manager. So if I can pick on Microsoft a little bit, my biggest problem with the Windows task manager is it doesn't manage tasks. I don't even know what that means. What it is a Windows dashboard of sorts, and it's a little bit sparse. When I wrote it originally, I was trying to write this, task manager for IT pros. I was trying to write something that kind of had, show me all the things that I can see in WMI that I can't see in Windows. Like, why is it that, we're in the 21st century and I still can't get, the netstat information in some kind of nice visual where I could actually analyze it and actually trend my traffic or do something. No, I got to do it all from command line. It's like, it was one of those things. Why can't I really see the installed apps on my machine? You know, you go to add remove programs, that is not all the installed apps on your machine. It's about 20% of them. You know, it's the big hitters, but it doesn't show you all the components and all the services. Nowadays, you can use like Wise uninstaller, you know, and you can get most of that stuff. They, you know, folks like them perfected it. But I looked at those kinds of things. It's like, well, if I'm managing a machine, why can't I just get that view? And in my original version, it used to actually remote into other machines. So if you were in a trusted network, I could actually use SWBEM locator from the good old days, because yes, I use COM, and you could go through it and you can just connect to a remote machine and make that work. I evolved it later to not do that because that kind of need wasn't there, but I just really wanted something where I could have my one-stop kitchen sink view and just see everything that's going on in my machine. So what am I getting at with this? So that was my app, and I'm not trying to sell it. It didn't cost anything anyway. But the thing about it that mattered to me was I was doing a lot of stuff with native methods, with COM, with that was a lot of it. I mean, I was doing some things with command line to actually pull the netstat information, you know, things that .NET 3. You know, .NET Core 3.1.1 would never have been able to do. It wasn't meant to do that. It was meant to be, you know, non-Windows based, so it didn't have those hooks that I needed to be able to get into those spaces. Yeah. And then when 5 came out, suddenly I could do that. And Microsoft said, you know what, this library that we're using, the system dot insert name here, because there's so many of them. Yep. They said, well, we need to make that work in NuGet, and we need to give you a package you can download, only the one you need, so we're not bloating you, so that you can pull that right down and do it. And honestly, 90% of it was about right. I mean, again, native is very difficult to accommodate. I don't fault them for that. Native is inherently Windows based, but nowadays, I mean, I have that app working in .NET 10. I mean, it doesn't seem to matter. They completely kicked the wall down, and I could pull down whatever packages I wanted. I only had to make a couple of adjustments, especially with threading, but other than that, it worked fine. Yeah. So it's not really a barrier anymore. I mean, you asked about the other arguments. I mean, I guess the other thing I would really, really say to Microsoft's credit, and I know Microsoft is such a big company, and I kind of don't look at Microsoft as a company. I kind of look at it as like this ecosystem with a bunch of islands. And the two little islands, they're maybe not little anymore, that I kind of have a deep love for is I love the .NET team and I love Visual Studio. I've loved Visual Studio as long as it's been out. I know people like, why use it? Because, I mean, Mads even said it. It's kind of the de facto standard for C# is. If you're going to do WPF, is Well, I mean, they have really good. Their C# tools in in Visual Studio Code now are actually really good, but I'm still happier in Visual Studio and running ReSharper and having my setup. But it's and those two groups have done such a great job. And one of the things that I think they've really been good at is just listening to the feedback and saying, you know what, we could have done Switch a little better, and we could have added, an ability to do inline context, or, to use the arrow functions to actually streamline, and get your code down to smaller blocks. Or, this doesn't perform that well. Like whenever folks raise their hand and say this link statement runs like, crap, and people are like, well, I'm just not going to use it. They don't listen. They're not going to fix it. Chances are they will if they understand the problem. And they have. And, like one of the people I follow, I'm not trying to name drop to death, but Nick Chapsas, he talks about performance improvements all the time, which honestly, he's one of the reasons I stay on top of so much of it, because so much changes. And it's, and it makes me laugh because his belief of that is span all the things. And I'm like, yeah, really, you look at the lowered code, the amount of times span has been thrown in for performance improvement. And I've used it for my own stuff, where I used to do these direct casts to actually, deal with those performance bottlenecks. And then, Microsoft looked at that and then fixed it. And now you don't have to sit there and, deconstruct your for loops and actually try to, you can just work with, those libraries indigenously, and they're performant, and they work to improve them every time. So, nice. And then, on the Linux side, I hear, well, why use C#? You should use C++. You should use Rust. It's like, look, yes, C++ is the OG. Rust is fast, but how much faster? And is it worth the tax to deal with, its maturation as a language? It's like Rust is fast, as someone who does so much object-oriented development, I look at that and I'm like, it's very limited on what I can do abstraction-wise and reusability. But then again, that may not matter to some folks, and that's okay. I mean, to each your own, or their own. But it's like when I was working with it and having to deal with their modules and all that, it's like, great, but then what am I really saving? It's like a couple of nanoseconds in speed for my specific use case. But then again, that's my use case. Who's to say that it doesn't actually improve that way? And they're really saying that C# and C++ are starting to become indiscernible at the point of when they're being compiled to not just throw C# in the trash that way. It's like, well, show me something other than Rust that they've accepted. I don't know if folks are really looking at the statistics or if it's a marketing thing. And I know our community is very smart, and I'm not picking on anybody. We all have our circles and whatnot, and there's stigmas, but I just tend to wonder how much is stigma and how much is reality, and how much of it is based on, well, what you knew a year ago versus today, because I feel like that needle keeps moving like rather quickly. So long answer to your question. I apologize. It's just been one of those things where I take a hit for C#. I'm like, oh, why do you use it? I'm like, because I love it to death, because I can do just about anything I want in it. I mean, that's why I use it.
Well, you mentioned Python and a few others, and yeah, sure, language is one thing, but it's all about the ecosystem. You mentioned the libraries, the NuGet packages, and I have an uncle who's a expert Acura mechanic, and I think Acura. I think it's part of the Honda family, but it's distinct. And yes, all cars, the architecture, you got four wheels. Well, now we got the piston kind, we got the hybrid kind, and we got the electric kind, but they all still have four wheels. They all still have the modern ones, disc brakes and a steering wheel. So you got similarities where some mechanics, you have these general mechanic shops. It's like, I don't care what kind of car you have, bring it in and we'll change your tires or we'll fix basic stuff. But if you want to go deep, you have to pick a manufacturer family, because there's meaningful differences in the tools and how they put together all the fancy functionality. And I think that's the same thing in programming platforms. It's not just the language, and certainly you can dance across the top and you can be productive in all of the different programming ecosystems. But if you really want to go deep, you really want to be an expert, then you have to kind of pick one and focus and go deep and get that 10,000 hours, to become an expert. And I think it's just really hard to be an equal expert in all of the environments. And so when I've been a consultant for a long time, it seems like every company, it's not the technology choice that drives these things. It's the people. You hire somebody who's an expert in one, you build some stuff in that one, then it has inertia. And so who's the next person that you're going to hire? Someone kind of who's experienced in the same stack. If you started something in Python, you're going to hire a next person in Python. You hire someone in .NET, the number 2 guys in .NET, number 3 guys in .NET, and now you have a .NET organization. And it doesn't make sense for a .NET organization to just say, oh yeah, let's just happen to do this in Rust. Well, can we do it in .NET? Well, yeah, we could, but Rust is cool, right? I mean, that makes no sense whatsoever.
And then you have like only a handful of experts, and then you have single points of failure, and it just makes maintainability a pain in the neck, and tech debt and all the pieces that fall. I mean, I try to find the happy medium, because one of the things I realized as I was getting older, I mean, at one point I was like, C# is my life. That's it. Because I was, again, raised in that culture. If you pick a language, you just stick the landing. It's like, I don't know, when you talk to people our age nowadays, I think most of us have that idea of C# is just another, tool in my toolbox, and you got to find the right tool for the job. I just last week was finishing writing something in Python for my company. Some folks are like, do you have to wash the stink off? I'm like, no, it served its purpose. In fact, I actually really like Python for its purpose. It was in a DevOps environment, proprietary information here, but it's in a DevOps environment, and its job exists, as an AWS Lambda function. And I picked it because, one, when I deal with those types of functions, I don't want them to be compiled. I'm a person, I don't pick Java, I don't pick C#, I don't pick anything that can be compiled, because it makes it way easier for, a DevOps person who's more of a scripter to be able to troubleshoot it.
Sure.
And also maintainability. I think a lot of us write stuff to be turnkey. I don't think except for astronomy, the stuff I've written in that app over the years, and I know the name's cheesy, But I used to, I don't ever look at it and go, that's my cookie jar, that's my code. It's like, if you've got something better, replace it. Throw that code away, replace it. I'll throw my own code away.
Yeah.
It's just kind of where we are, but is it the right tool for the job?
Yeah.
I've been asked, would you use .NET for anything? No, I mean, not anything. I don't use .NET for front end. And I know some people do.
You could fill in the blank with any technology name. Would you
Absolutely.
use technology name here for absolutely everything? Well, no.
Yeah, I was in an argument, a couple of weeks ago. Why would you use Node for REST services? I'm like, because it's really good at it. You just need to set it up right. Of course, nowadays, I don't know, people still need to get over that whole NPM thing, but Node's fantastic for that. With the 3.1.1, the reason I know that version so very well is because to me, that was the specific turning point in AWS for when you were using that for your REST services. Because before that, people didn't want to. So AWS, it was Node, it was Go, it was Python, and you could use .NET. And then I felt like when 3.1.1 came out, it was a proper contender because that it had the right performance level, because they had a lot of performance tweaks between 2 and 3 that they had to really iron out. It was like a 60% improvement or something between 2 and 3. So back then it's I built all my stuff on Node, and I have no shame in that. I think it's great, and there's nothing wrong with it. Plus, with Node, the way we set it up, we did it in TypeScript. It appealed to our Java developers because the syntax was similar. They could wrap their heads around it. Strongly typed language, they could understand it. But if I'm doing, something super high performant, back end kind of thing, I'm, really dealing with just millions of transactions and something that's going to be really beefy. Maybe something my REST service calls. Yeah, I might write it in C#. I might write it in something a little more powerful. But I don't think there's any shame in knowing multiple languages. Yes, there's a couple of trade-offs. Do you become a jack of all trades kind of thing, and then you really don't master anything? And it's is that where you want to be? I think we all have our favorites. I think we work on that as best as we can. And then it comes down to, well, if a company takes that mindset, how do you navigate the tech debt? And then you got to kind of figure out how far are you willing to flex? So maybe instead of we only use this front end here, it's we'll use these two. I've been in situations where we are a React house. Okay, but we have a number of folks who are pretty good at Angular. Well, and they want to use it for this, and they have a prototype and it looks good. Well, we're a React house. Can't we do both? Is it that bad? And then you do the analysis, and I guess the better analysis is, can we support it? I mean, is it really that much more expensive at the end of the day? You look at market share, you look at a number of things, but does it always have to be one thing? And then, of course, God forbid you're in a situation where the tech stack that you use suddenly becomes untenable, and you end up in some weird situation where it becomes a funding issue, like Terraform, going to their model, which I don't think is the end of the world, or you end up in some really weird situation like what happened with Unity. Say that happened to part of your tech stack somehow, and suddenly it became, an unsupported model because you just don't have the funding for it or whatever, or you lose the expertise, etc. What do you do? So, I don't know. As an architect, I think about that all the time. It's always, can I sustain this? It's most of the time we're designing stuff. I'm not looking at something and saying, how will that work tomorrow? I'm looking at how will that be in 5 to 10 years? Can we sustain it? When someone comes at you with let's write this in C++, I'm like, I get what you're coming at. We're getting to, but it's are we just creating a massive, ream of tech debt for the company?
Well, we were talking about, misconceptions of .NET, and so many things have changed, and we're going to see how .NET 10 really comes out. But from my interview with Matt Christensen and all the early reporting of the performance investment in .NET that's come out. You mentioned Rust as well. The data that's circulating around, and again, I think we have to wait until .NET comes out, but the data that I'm seeing is that in 2025 with .NET 10, C# is leapfrogging ahead of Rust, ahead of Go. I'm seeing numbers like C# is 180% more performant than Go Fiber, 190% more performant than Rust Actix. And is at the top of the heap. I guess we'll see, but maybe that argument may be flipped on its head.
It completely depends what you're doing with it too. I mean,
Oh, always.
if you're
Yeah, if we're calling out to a database, then none of that matters.
it's like, do I feel comfortable right now using the any function in links though? I don't know,
Right.
or
Yeah.
I know I'm
Yeah.
calling out a very specific red herring, but it's like, I always look at that kind of stuff. And what is it? Is it Sharp Lab? I've used that quite a bit to look at the lower code just to see how things have changed. I mean,
Yeah.
what was it? Even .NET, was it before 8? I'm trying to think where it was. It might have been right at 8, where like 4 each was slower than 4.
Oh.
And like you looked at the lower code and it was like, because of the way it was doing the enumerable, it was actually slower. So I'd actually convert my stuff to 4. And of course, ReSharper would be screaming at me like, "Why are you doing that?"
Right.
I'm like, "Get off my back, ReSharper. It's all good. Ignore
Yeah.
comments and put the ignore block in there." You know, or why use this link function versus that one? And yeah, I mean, again, it depends what you do. Like with Windows performance, which I've mentioned, because it's such a resource heavy thing, sometimes it isn't even C sharp that's the problem. It's just, what it's calling behind the scenes. If that's not more performant, you're not going to see an improvement. I think it depends on the use cases that you're going to use it for. If you're looking for like what everybody else is doing, like they're doing REST functions and they're, et cetera, and testing that out, I think you really just need to beat it and just see
Yeah.
what you get out of it. Like really run it through the paces. I mean, Microsoft's willing to stand behind their claims.
Yep.
And if
Yep.
you tell them it's wrong, they're going to pay attention. And I'm not saying it because I'm trying to make them sound good. I'm not a shill for them. I don't work for them, but I've seen it. I've seen
Mm-hmm.
them do it. And I always love when that happens. Because like you
Yeah.
tell the .NET team, I just dropped the mic, they pick it right back up. And
Yeah.
they go and
Yeah.
they look at it. So, I think one of the things that maybe I'm a little biased to the .NET side of it for so long, aside from my own successes and the fact that I've loved C sharp, and I love it not because I was told to, it really has been versatile for almost
Mm-hmm.
anything I've wanted to do. And I've done a lot of really crazy things, in my opinion, that are not the generic CRUD type REST service, like I've done some really deep Windows stuff. And when it comes to it, that community piece is what I really do care about, because I don't feel like you have a problem and you're swinging in the wind. I mean, yes, sometimes it feels like, well, I just threw it on Stack Overflow and I hope someone can answer it, which I know nowadays people using ChatGPT, they're asking what, they're oops, I just said ChatGPT. They're using those services to answer their questions, but it's one thing, to go that route, but it's another one they actually hear you and then they make the improvements so that you're not having to live with potential hacks, because they don't
Yeah.
want you to do that either. And also
Yeah.
they'll ask the question, why'd you do it? Because also, I mean, they do make changes that I look at and go, well, did you need to do that? Like in .NET 10, excuse me, in C, is it .NET or C sharp? In .NET 10, they're doing extra context for like Lambda functions to add in references. I'm like, but that's not what some of these were written to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you're augmenting it. Maybe I've got to assume there's a use case. Or
Yeah.
like one of them that I always didn't like is primary constructors. I don't
Mhm.
like them. I don't think they should be there. I'm one of those people because when I look at it from a readability point of view, it makes a class confusing to me. Like if I see,
Yeah.
I'm seeing injection at the top of the class, I'm like,
Now there's
it's
two
like
ways to write a class.
I'd rather write my default constructor right below it, like the way I've always done it, and structure it that way. But then again, they wouldn't have done it unless folks were asking for an easier way to do it. You can make the same argument for things like records.
Yeah.
I don't feel like records are necessarily that important, because at the end of the day, it's a type of class. It's like so. But then if you look at the application where folks use it, it's for rapid development points of view, records look pretty great. Like when you're
Yeah.
implementing them, yeah, they have some things that they need to tweak on it. But I look at that, I'm like, I'd be fine using a class for that, or just using a struct if I had to.
Yeah.
I don't really mind doing that, but maybe I'm also too old school, and maybe I'm looking at it that like, you kids don't know what good music is kind of thing. It's like maybe I'm reaching that point in my life where I'm just I don't get the joke, so I
Yeah.
just stay out of the way and let other people enjoy it. So I don't think anything is done in a vacuum.
Sure.
I think that it was done based on feedback.
Well, as we kind of get to the end of our time here and wrap up, out of using .NET for 23 years, what's the kind of the one final thought that you'd leave to people that maybe in their first 1 to 3 years as a developer, that maybe you'd wish that you understood way back then? Maybe we can jumpstart a few young people here.
Well, it's so different nowadays when you start off. I mean, it's a more of a trick question than you think it is, even though that's not what you meant. If I were to start off today, I mean, I think a lot of it is just belief in yourself. I know that sounds really silly, but especially if you don't have traditional software engineering roots, like you didn't come through school and you didn't have that, because there is still a little bit of the gatekeeping in the community. And I would say, don't let that get to you. You want to build something, you want to solve a problem. I don't think that most folks are programming or writing code because I just want to write code because it's neat. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe there's an interest, but at the end of the day, you're trying to solve a problem that you don't have an easy answer for, because I'm not going to go write code for something that I can download a tool for,
Right.
And I feel like most of you are in that place too if you're starting out. My advice would be play. Be safe, create a space, create a Docker container, take an old computer, do whatever you want to do and just write it and have faith in yourself, and don't worry about making it perfect. That comes with time. You look at the code of a senior developer and you may see that it's really refined. You don't get there overnight. You get there from lessons learned. And don't feel like you have to make the most perfect thing possible. Don't be afraid to prototype. Don't be afraid to play with the tools. Don't be afraid to sandbox. And if, you're facing a lot of criticism, especially on your own, it's like, take what's constructive and then go do your thing. I really don't feel like people should hold themselves back, due to gatekeeping. I know other folks in the field have said it, but it's just, and don't worry about AI. I know it's out there. I know people are using it as a tool. Some people think it's going to replace them. Should I even bother? Will AI do it for me? I still think that what you have in your head, your great idea that you're going to write code with, AI doesn't have that. And if it does, it's probably not the same thing. Don't let it stop you,
Yeah.
So
Love it. I like the idea of playing, just like learning a musical instrument. You just got to play. You just got to
have fun and make mistakes. The compiler will tell you anyway.
Right.
Rosalind will beat you up if it doesn't like what you gave it, but don't be afraid to play.
Awesome. Well, Josh, thanks for coming on the podcast and chatting with me. This is great. Good talking about .NET.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. And until next time, dear listener, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure and DevOps podcast. You can find us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Visit our sponsor, ClearMeasure, at www.clearmeasure.com. And on behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.